This podcast is made possible by Avalara.
Hi, this is Bobby Liebrock, the CFO of Red Hat, and I'm here with the CFO Thought Leader podcast.
This is episode 917.
From their standpoint, as I said, they're a buy and hold investor. So we know that we've got, probably at a minimum 5 to 6 years as their typical hold. So it gives us time to come in, make the changes that are necessary, make the investments that are necessary to help us grow, to prove our strategy and what we're doing to grow, and then look forward to some form of exit down the road. So the capital structure strategy we have is, quite frankly, it's really simple. Private equity investment, we have no debt. We're growing on average about 25% a year on top line revenue. And with no debt, the more revenue we generate, the more falls through to the bottom line. So we've got a really interesting business model itself, as well as a private equity owner and sponsor that's helping us get to where they think we can get to, and in many regards, stretching us, pushing us, challenging us to be able to do more than we actually think we can do, and then prove that over time.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Joel Campbell, CFO of TreviPay. While the 2008 financial crisis has been a reliable source of career lessons for many of our finance leader guests, Joel Campbell may be the first CFO to share with us a customer support lesson from the crisis. Back in 2006, Campbell, a seasoned treasury executive, had been recruited to help build a robust treasury function for Ameriprise Financial, the recently spun-off financial planning division of American Express. 2 years into his treasury tour duty at Ameriprise, it was September 16th, 2008. A date, Campbell tells us, that has forever been burned into his memory. It seems a money market fund widely used by Ameriprise customers broke the buck, or as Campbell explains, it became the first money market fund in investing history to let its net asset value drop below $1. What happens next, Campbell tells us, became one of his greatest learning moments. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode after this.
This episode is presented by Avalara. That's the sound of not worrying about sales tax compliance. Because when you automate it with Avalara, you don't have to worry about collecting sales tax or tracking who and what is tax exempt. With Avalara, you don't even have to worry about new tax laws and regulations. Avalara does it for you. If your business sells internationally, Avalara has you covered with cross-border tax compliance solutions. And when it comes time to file tax returns, Avalara automatically takes care of that too, giving you one less thing to worry about. Avalara has managed billions of sales for small, mid-size, and enterprise businesses, and seamlessly works with your current sales, e-commerce, and accounting platforms. Take the worry out of tax compliance with Avalara. Learn more at avalara.com. That's AVALARA.com.
Say, hello, we're speaking with Joel Campbell, CFO of TreviPay. Joel, welcome.
Great to be with you today. Thanks for having me on.
So, Joel, we always begin by asking our guests to look back for us, and we're wondering what those experiences were that you feel really prepared you to be a CFO. What comes to mind?
Yeah, so like a lot of accountants do, I started out with a newly minted bachelor's degree in accounting and went to the public accounting routes. I started with Arthur Andersen in 1990 in an office in Columbus, Ohio. Big Buckeyes fan, for any Buckeye listeners out there. And I was convinced for sure that I was going to be a partner someday. And after a couple of years of doing audit-related work. It was a smaller office, so we supported Japanese manufacturers that were building parts for Honda of America, healthcare. I got to do some taxes and consulting. It was a really interesting role. But after 2 years, I realized I really didn't care for accounting. It just really wasn't what I wanted to do from a career standpoint. So like a lot of people, I kind of wandered, to be honest. I wandered through a company in internal audit, was kind of disenchanted at that point. And then I found myself recruited to a great company in Minneapolis called the St. Paul Companies, now Travelers Insurance, where I had a bunch of opportunities starting in audit and then migrating to M&A, where I spent a couple of years doing M&A. And then while I was in M&A, I had a partner of mine internally that built a friendship with, and he was the assistant treasurer and was starting a new global treasury group. I had no idea what treasury was. I was an accountant by trade, but I quickly pivoted out of M&A after a couple of years and started to work for him in a corporate treasury role and fell in love with it. And the thing I liked most about it was that it was a looking forward function. It was not a looking back function. And I think the thing I got disenchanted in accounting with is it was always looking in the rear. You're always looking in the rear view mirror. Treasury was focused on the markets. It was dynamic. It was cash. It was interesting to think about the capital structure of the company. And for me, I just kind of naturally fell into it. So I immediately started my MBA. I went back to school and got my MBA in finance at the University of Minnesota. And from there, I spent 25 years in corporate treasury at 3 other companies and just had a really rich and diverse experience in going through that. But I think for me, that moment of, I thought I loved accounting. I thought I was going to be a CPA and a partner at a big firm. That was going to be my life. After 2-3 quick years, I realized that was just not for me. So I pivoted to something else, and it has been extremely fulfilling in terms of what I've done in my career.
I just want to name some of the companies you've been with because they're all recognizable, from Travelers, you went on to Ameriprise, to Western Union, to H&R Block, where you spent 7 years, became vice president, treasurer, and chief risk officer. How am I doing? Are there other?
You've got them all. Yeah, you've got them all. I think for me, I tell my story as a career of half steps. And I think over my career as I progressed, I've always kind of tried to prepare myself for the next step. And typically looking at those above me, those around me, the credentials they had, the experiences they had, the things that they were working on, and trying to position myself well enough to be able to say I could do those types of roles. So I did. I moved quickly up the ranks with Travelers. I actually got to spend 3 years in London as a 3-year tour of duty running their London Treasury Center. And a quick side story on that, I had a great boss there, Sheila. If you're listening, Sheila, I still love you. Sheila taught me a really valuable lesson one day about work and with the value of work and the meaning of work. When I walked into her office with something I didn't really want to do, I was kind of complaining about it, thought it was beneath me, and she looked at me very carefully, patiently, and said, "That's why we call it work. You have to work at it." And that taught me a valuable lesson 20 some years ago around hard work and why it's important to work hard at your career. So as I migrated through that time at Travelers, I got recruited out of Travelers to go work at Ameriprise. As Ameriprise was spinning off from American Express as their financial advice service. And for me, it was an opportunity to take my skills that I had built in one company and go apply them in a similar industry, but at a different company, to see if I could be successful. And after some success there, and I have a story in a moment, I'll talk about it in my kind of career insight or financial insight. But after learning there, I got recruited out to go work for a really strong corporate treasurer at Western Union, where I knew I needed some skills. I had aspired at that point to become a corporate treasurer, but I knew I needed some skills to be able to really fully say I could do the job, particularly in capital markets, capital management, kind of that deep capital experience. And Scott, the treasurer at the time, was really, really strong. Took me under his wing and taught me a tremendous amount about how to be a treasurer and how a treasurer thinks and works. So I've had those experiences along the way. And even though the job titles changed and the compensation changed, I was never really focused on title or comp. I was more focused on what could I learn from this person. And I will say, I worked for people that I loved. I worked for people that I didn't love so much. But the thing I learned from each of them has kind of shaped my philosophy and the way I manage, the way I think about things. You can take nuggets from each side, good and bad, the things that you want to do and emulate, things that you don't want to do and that you don't want to learn from. But all of those have shaped my career and have really set me up well as I progress through my career at other companies.
We always use the expression, you raised your hand for certain opportunities to help get yourself broadened along the way. We hear that frequently from accounting executives who sometimes want to get into the FP&A realm so they can reveal their analytical minds. I know it's similar. It's similar but different. Treasurers have to broaden themselves at times and raise their hands because in some ways they're a little bit siloed. Would you agree, or how did you look at it?
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think, my experience over the years at now 4 large public companies is that even within a finance function, individual functions can be siloed. And much like, taxes in many companies, a very specialized, kind of highly trained group of people focused on one thing, I look at treasury the same way. I look at accounting and FP&A and some of those as easily interchangeable. But tax and treasury I've always looked at as very specific disciplines with specific bodies of knowledge and experience that you need to be successful. So I would completely agree with that. And my quick story on that is that as I migrated into my role at H&R Block, very specifically to come in and lead the company through a leveraged recap as it was selling its bank, I learned very quickly that treasury had consistently over time been looked at as a silo with a leader who was not necessarily good at kind of breaching across the different groups within the company. So I had that charge from day one when I joined the company was to spread the good news about treasury, show the things that we can do across the company. And that's where I ultimately had success doing that, leading them through a leverage recap, which then led for an opportunity to take on a broader role, taking on enterprise risk management and crisis management and some of those things that I had knowledge of, but no real exposure to in managing. So I think by being open-minded and reaching across groups, senior management typically sees that as an opportunity for someone who wants to broaden their horizons, who wants to get out of the silo and be able to do broader and bigger things.
Interesting. And again, just to touch on what I think you just mentioned, the crisis management, it was almost a way for you to reach across the organization. It allowed you to connect with others,
right?
That perhaps you wouldn't ordinarily, as a treasurer, be able to.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. The thing that it really did for me was it helped me deepen my knowledge of the business. I understand financial services. I've spent my entire career in financial services, but at Block specifically, it helped me get down into the weeds of how does the business run and what are the real business risks to running a financial services firm like that, particularly in that world, cybersecurity. The importance of maintaining, the confidentiality and the privacy of the data of all the folks that go there to get their taxes done. So I know more about cybersecurity and the risks around it as a finance person than I probably will ever want to know. But it really gave me an opportunity to get deep into the business, work with those partners across the business who could teach me more about the business to help me better think about the risks that we might be facing as we progress along time.
Well, we want to find out about TreviPay, but I'm curious, for all the reasons we've been discussing here, was this a recruiter who finally helped you open the door to the CFO office, or what happened exactly?
It was, yeah. I was not really looking for an opportunity at the time. I mean, I think most professionals, particularly if you've been at a company, 5, 7, 10 years, you're always kind of open to what opportunities might be out there. I clearly had progressed within Block to a point where I was ready for something new and something different. There wasn't really an opportunity internally at the time to do that. So when a recruiter reached out to me and said, private equity firm located where you're living in Kansas City, they want somebody with a deep treasury background, particularly a deep capital markets background, because they want to refinance the company. They offer working capital to their clients. Like it was like this perfect fit of here's all the experience I had and skills and knowledge I had gained. Now I can take that and apply that and get a broader title with a broader role, but also apply everything that I knew to really help the company, bring value to the company quickly to help the company grow and get to where it wanted to go to.
And I'm struck by that. It was a remarkable match. We always hear that, but
You very likely might have had other CFO opportunities, but they weren't a good match as perhaps this one was. Am I right about that? Or what would you tell us?
That's correct. At the time that the opportunity at TreviPay came along, the company was not actually disclosed to me because it's held by private equity, and they were going through their own process to be purchased out of a public company by a private equity firm and kind of taken private. So from that perspective, the company wasn't disclosed, but the match was what was disclosed. But while I was going through that process, I had an opportunity to become treasurer at another company based in Minneapolis, where I really ultimately wanted to live at some point in my life. So I kind of had the balance between go do what I knew how to do and could do honestly in spades for another company, or look at an opportunity to take the skill set that I had built and apply it in a slightly new industry, still financial services, but a slightly new industry owned by private equity, which I had never really dealt with before, but take those skills and apply it in that and see if I could be successful. And that to me was a much more compelling opportunity. And again, it wasn't necessarily about title or comp. It was more about, this is a really interesting experience. I've never done this before. Can I be successful? Can I actually go and do this and be successful in a different world?
wonderful. Nice to see how the wheels were turning for you. Let's jump to TreviPay. Tell us about this company. What does it do? What are its offerings?
Yeah, TreviPay is a really interesting story, and I'll try and unpack some of it. At TreviPay, our tagline is that we believe loyalty begins at the payment. So we are a business-to-business, a B2B payments disruptor in the fintech world. Really, what we're doing is matching sellers, large sellers, or we call them network sponsors, and all the buyers that they bring to the table, matching them through automation and technology to give them more choice and convenience around how they pay, to open new markets for them in their business. I'll give an example of that in a minute. And then to help them really automate their accounts receivables. We're less focused on, trade credit and offering working capital, even though we do that, but it's more about the technology we bring to solve really complicated problems for B2B sellers and B2B buyers, and the incredible amount of disruption that's happening in that space.
Can you give us maybe and it's private equity owned, but is there a longer capital structure story to it, or what can you share with us?
Yeah, so we're owned, just full disclosure, we're owned by Corsair Capital out of New York. Corsair is, I would call, kind of a mid-tier level private equity firm. I love their model, and that was one of the things that I really gravitated towards when I came to TreviPay, is that they are a typical buy and hold investor. They're not a churn and burn private equity firm that owns you for 18 months or 2 years and cuts it up and makes a profit. They really come alongside senior management, help us, give us advice and counsel on how to think about the business, think about our strategy, think about how we're growing, and are there to support us, but they're not fingers in. And I think that's one of the things I love the most. From their standpoint, as I said, they're a buy and hold investor. So we know that we've got, probably at a minimum 5 to 6 years as their typical hold. So it gives us time to come in, make the changes that are necessary, make the investments that are necessary to help us grow, to prove our strategy and what we're doing to grow, and then look forward to some form of exit down the road. So the capital structure strategy we have is, quite frankly, it's really simple. Private equity investment, we have no debt. We're growing on average about 25% a year on top line revenue. And with no debt, the more revenue we generate, the more falls through to the bottom line. So we've got a really interesting business model itself, as well as a private equity owner and sponsor that's helping us get to where they think we can get to, and in many regards, stretching us, pushing us, challenging us to be able to do more than we actually think we can do, and then prove that over time.
Yeah. So, the private equity partner relationship, very often there are certain metrics that the private equity partner appreciates and certain metrics that perhaps you appreciate, and maybe you've brought them even to the partner's attention. Here's something that we need to pay closer attention to if, in fact, we're going to look to value the company this way. I don't know, but can you share? I usually call this lines of sight. What are the metrics that matter to you? We're always interested if there's a business dynamic that the finance leader has really sought to educate people about.
Sure,
Anything
sure.
you can share with us?
Yeah, well, the great thing about me coming into TreviPay was I had no experience with private equity whatsoever. I mean, I knew about them, read about them in the news, but I didn't really understand how they think and how they work. So there was a tremendous learning curve, I'll call it, for the first, 9 to maybe even 18 months of learning how they think and how they work. A couple of the metrics that I was introduced to that I had little to no experience with is the rule of 40, which is a 40% combination of your top line revenue growth and your EBITDA margin has to equal 40% or higher and growing over time. So when you think about that in light of where I had come from in a public company, there's no public company that will probably ever get to that kind of rule of 40, or maybe only a handful. So it was a completely new concept in thinking about how to run the company for the leverage it could generate in top line revenue growth and then dropping as much of that revenue as you can into the EBITDA line. Completely new concept. We manage to it monthly. We report out it to our board and audit committee as well as our ownership structure on a routine basis. So very important metric for us to track. The second metric that we track, which I had some familiarity with before, we're getting a little bit better in granularity, but in this B2B payment space is gross margin. Kind of looking at what is the revenue you're generating, what is the cost to get that revenue, the cost of selling to get that revenue, and then how do you think about that gross margin over time and getting expansion in gross margin to show that you can really operate and leverage the business to operate as efficiently and productively as you possibly can. We're blessed, just given the structure that we have. We have, gross margins in the kind of the low 80% range, which is tremendous for this type of business. Other competitors, particularly some of our smaller competitors, are not at that level, which gives you some element of we're kind of at scale. And we're progressing and trying to push ourselves forward in the gross margin we can generate. But those are two metrics that we kind of live and die by. I think the last thing I would say is the discipline I think I have brought from public companies, particularly around liquidity management, as I think about the recent banking crisis. When you think about what's happened with some of those banks, a number of fintechs had money in Silicon Valley Bank and some of the other smaller regional banks. I think I brought a discipline to the company around how we manage our short-term cash, our excess cash that we generate, where we put it, who we invest it with, making sure there's a large corporate capital provider that sits behind those funds where we're investing. But I think I brought some of that discipline to the company. I wouldn't say that it hadn't been there before, but a much more pointed view so that when you get into the recent credit crisis or the recent banking crisis, you see that discipline allows us to demonstrate to our ownership structure and our board, we're good. We're taken care of. We got money in the right places. We're well diversified. We've really thought through some of those issues. So I think some of that public company discipline I've been able to bring to the table.
Want to just touch on talent with you. You arrived, of course, in the CFO office during COVID, really. So you probably had a remote workforce. Everyone was not standing in line to greet the new CFO. At the same time, we've heard finance leaders, COVID really challenged them in certain ways to think about their people a little differently and how they served their employees and incented them. Wondering, as a finance leader, whether the people equation has become a bigger part of the role than you might have imagined, or what would you tell us when it comes to talent and people in the organization?
Yeah, I was hired, the role was even pitched to me as a CFO plus. And you hear that term a lot in the news recently. There's a few Wall Street Journal articles recently about that term, but I was really hired as a CFO plus, which meant CFO, traditional responsibilities, plus whatever else there are needs for. So over the past year or so, my team and I have taken kind of complete ownership for workforce planning. and looking at hiring decisions, looking at where we're putting people, where we're making those investments. So as I started into the role, naturally you pivot towards my team. What do I need to do? Do I have I always say the right butts in the right seats doing the right work? So you pivot to that quickly, make sure you got the right people in your team, growing your team for where you think the business is going to grow. So that's where I started. And then after kind of the first 9 months or year of doing that, then I started to pivot into where's the organization in terms of our hiring processes, where are we putting our investments in the right departments and the right teams. As we thought then really about COVID, I went through the entire interview process. I went through the entire onboarding process and nearly my first entire year without meeting much of anyone in person. So that has its own challenge. And how do you get to know people? How do you spend time with your folks, with your team, when you can't be present with each other in an office? So we embrace. At the time, we fully embraced a remote work environment. Everybody has all the support that they need at home, and particularly, Teams. Microsoft Teams has gone a tremendous way to allow us to kind of work remotely like you're in an office. And we gave everybody the grace to be able to do what you needed to do to take care of your family. A year and a half into joining the company, we built a new office, which was kind of not in favor at the time. So a year ago, we moved into a new office. We did a build out and we brought people back together in I would say, kind of an unstructured hybrid manner, 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday being in an office. And I personally, as an extrovert, have found that to be really rich. I get to know people, you have the hallway conversations, you get to collaborate. So I think I've been able to do some of those things now that we have office space, but we're still trying to be sensitive to that's not for everyone. And giving people kind of Mondays and Fridays to work from home and be maybe a little bit more productive at home than what they can be in an office. But I think like everybody, we're trying to find the right balance here. I don't think there's a perfect answer to it, but kind of being involved in the hiring process and making investments in the right place, as well as trying to be thoughtful around some form of hybrid work environment that works for everyone, is the way we're trying to tackle it at TreviPay for today.
A really wonderful talent overview for us, so thank you for that. I wanted to jump to our finance strategic moment question, if that's okay. We'll jump there. You gave a nice overview of metrics and what have you as well. So thank you. Some great detail for us. Wanted to ask you for a finance strategic moment where we just kind of come out with this generic question, but we're surprised where finance leaders take us sometimes. So let's ask you, as you look through your career, if you could just share a moment of strategic insight that you've had along the way. It might be career-oriented, it might be business-oriented, or both. What would you share with us?
Sure. So my story is in 2006, when I joined Ameriprise Financial, it had just spun off from American Express, as it was deemed as America's financial planning firm, kind of focused on the mass affluent and helping them build wealth and create financial plans. A tremendous business model, a really interesting, business with 7 or 8 very distinct business lines. A great company, still a great company today. And in full disclosure, I'm still a client. I love their model and what they do. But when I joined the company in 2006, we were finishing that spin-off process. 2 years later, in 2008, the credit crisis hits. So the day that's kind of burned infamously in my mind is September 16th, 2008. And the story is when the reserve primary fund of the reserve funds broke the buck. The first money market fund in investing history to let their net asset value drop below $1. That had never happened before. And the term around the whole credit crisis of unprecedented was probably overused in the press, but truly unbelievably unprecedented at the time. Ameriprise, had used that fund for over 300,000 customers who were investing all of their excess cash in their portfolios in this fund as a money market fund. So when that fund broke the buck, it immediately spurred, now what do we do, right? This hadn't happened before. So the thing I loved about Ameriprise's response that sticks with me to this day was the executive team quickly pivoted towards, we need to take care of the customer, period, full stop. That's what we need to do first. So within about 10 days of that fund breaking the buck, and I could tell a little bit about that story, but within 10 days, the management team had decided we will step in off of our own balance sheet, and we committed a little over $400 million off our balance sheet to put into our clients' accounts to support them. They were using this money for paying mortgages, paying tuition bills for their college students, groceries, food, whatever it was. They were using these money market accounts for that. We knew we had to step in and do the right thing for our customers. I think the second thing it taught me was that as a treasurer, particularly at the time as an aspiring treasurer, how do you think about looking forward? And I'm not just saying looking forward to what's happening in your business, but looking forward in the market to understand what are the market influences that can impact our business, and how do we think about them? So not just one step, 2, 3, 4 steps forward, trying to understand where the market is headed and reading the signs so that you can step back and make sure you're making the right decisions from a risk standpoint or a liquidity standpoint to be able not only to run your business, but in that type of business specifically, how can you support your customers in the right way? And I will tell you, as an employee, and now having gone through days as a treasurer and now as a CFO, I'm very loyal to that company for my own personal financial planning because of what I saw them do in that moment, how they handled it, how they then, even beyond supporting their customers, went through litigation. They sued the funds. They talked to regulators. They tried to do everything they could to make the right thing happen for our customers and customers broadly of the reserve funds at that point in time. That moment and how we handled it and how I thought about it from a treasury perspective are permanently etched. It influences every decision I make around where I invest excess funds for my companies, how I think about financing and structuring and funding things, and how I think truly about what do we need to do to support the customer. Just an incredible lesson very early in my treasury career that has stuck with me now for 15, 16 years.
From episode 842, this is 1 Minute with Ross Mukin, CFO of Sophia Genetics.
Current market environment, you really need to be on top of your costs, on top of your workforce and headcount planning, and your capex. And so, we're just obsessed in the details right now because every dollar matters, right? And you really want to be able to extend your cash runway as long as possible, and make sure you're being super prudent with the capital you're putting to work. And so, we're spending a lot of time truly understanding at a very micro level, where are we spending money? Why are we spending money? Right? What are our people doing every day? Does what they do match with what we say our initiatives are supposed to be and what our key goals are, and making sure the whole thing kind of comes together. And so obviously, again, in the finance org,
And we're going to move to our mentoring round, where we'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. We want to take you back to that first 30 days, however, when you joined TreviPay for the first time, that first 30 or 60 days. There had to have been something that you wish you knew, something about the role that maybe wasn't entirely clear to you. And here's the question. If you could go back in time and just explain something to yourself, what would that have been?
Yeah, I've prided myself over the years on being able to quickly pick up and understand complicated financial services business. I had been in insurance, I've been life insurance, financial planning, migrated to money, global money movement through Western Union, and then at Block in taxes. So I felt like I could really understand a complicated business. I wish I had learned, and I wish I had maybe listened a little more deeply to the boss that hired me and the team that came around me on the complicated nature of a B2B payments business. This business is far more complicated than it looks on the outside. It looks like simple B2B payments. Everybody kind of understands how that works, but the complications of organizing and running a business, the compliance it takes, the money movement, the FP&A related work that my team goes through to help the company continue to grow is extremely complicated. So I wish I had maybe listened or learned a little faster up front. I would say it's taken me, my full 2.5 years that I've been here to really learn deeply, better understand the company and how it operates. But if I could go back 2.5 years ago, I wish I had learned and listened a little more carefully and maybe picked up on some things then that would have benefited me now.
We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side of things. We wonder if you have a personal habit, part of a daily routine maybe, that you're known for. People would point it out to you. That's how Joel does it. He's always done it that way. Don't know why. It might be something a family member would point out to us.
Yeah.
Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I say very openly, I have a deep Christian faith. My father was a Baptist minister for nearly my entire life. That really grounds me. It gives me hope and confidence, and it gives me an influence over my perspective on how I manage and relate to people. So I think the response you would get from not just the people who work for me at TreviPay, but people who've worked for me in the past of, I'm grounded, I'm level-headed, I think deeply through issues. And I try and lead with this maybe sound odd, but I try and lead with humility. I'm not better than them. I've grown and come up through the ranks like most of the folks on my team have over time. So I know the roles they're in. I understand what they do. And I try to lead with a level of humility of really understanding the issues that they deal with day in and day out and trying to offer support. Moving obstacles in the company to get things done, challenging other people in the company to help, finance have a bigger seat at the table or get automation or things that we need to help be more efficient. So that faith and that grounding and helping me to be level-headed really allows me to have a management style that practices the same thing in the way I manage and lead people day in and day out.
Nice. Thank you for that. We wonder if you have a book recommendation for us. It doesn't have to be a business book. It might be something you escape with. It's your call.
Yeah.
Anything come to mind?
Yeah. Neil Pasricha wrote a book of You Are Awesome. That book came out probably, 2-3 years ago. And I don't, the thing I love about some of the business books is you can pick them up and read a chapter or two and put it down for a while and come back to it. So that is a book that's laying on my desk here at home. I pick it up every once in a while and read a chapter, but it really helps you focus on, I think many times, particularly finance people, we can easily get beaten down by the market or by the board or by audit committee or management. And it just helps remind me that the things that we do, we're pushing rocks uphill sometimes all day long. And it helps remind you that there's value in doing that. And when you get to the top and you move obstacles out of the way and you see what you've accomplished, it's really rewarding. I remind my team of this all the time. Look back to 2.5 years ago when we started on this journey, where we are today. We're light years ahead of where we thought we could get to, but we're even light years ahead of where most people thought we would get to. And that is really rewarding and enriching. So it just helps remind me that we're good at what we do. We're good finance professionals. We have the right role in the company, and you need to give yourself some credit for that sometimes.
So we're up to our final question where we want to ask you to look forward finally. And we'd like to know what your priorities are as a CFO for the next 12 months.
Yeah, wow. I think the biggest one for us, being owned by private equity and in a environment where the B2B payment space is clearly, being disrupted, it is probably one of the new frontiers in terms of what's happening and changing in the market with the broad digitization of payments. I think for us, it's making sure that we stay in the right position in the market relative to our competitors, that we focus on growing the company and growing the company quickly. And in doing that, operating efficiently and dropping as much of that growth into our earnings as we possibly can. And then I think the last thing for us is just strategically making sure that we can articulate our strategy internally, but we can demonstrate to our ownership team that the strategy we put in place is having the benefits that we expect it to have. For me, those are really dominant priorities. The last one I would mention then is you're always looking on the horizon when you're owned by private equity of what's the exit and what's the timing for the exit and what does the exit look like. I really don't try and focus on the exit. I'm trying to focus on the journey to get to the exit. And for us particularly, even in the finance team, building automation, setting ourselves up for whatever's coming down the road, making sure we have the right systems, the right people and the right, functionality and processes around all that so that we can stand up and say, we can take on whatever's coming, whatever that future looks like. And whenever we get there, we'll have the right finance team to be able to support it. I think those are the four things that I'm really focused on for the future.
Joel Campbell, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Great. Thank you.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.